when we're reviewing the content, can you always pick it up and throw it? And why do you have the right to throw it at her? Go back to the mirror. Go back to understanding these things. The other part is the mote in your eye. That's another reference of before you start to judge someone, clear out your eyes so you can see yourself in the mirror. Because I imagine if I start looking at myself in the mirror and understanding the questions and my own triggers, I would know why I responded to Kelly's content the way that I did. Hello. We have a lot to talk about. We must take our time. We must think deeply, slowly, with intention. If you haven't been here before, my name is Danny Daniela, and this is Dear Creator. And my goal here is to process the content that I consume. Content online from creators who are content creators, authors, those who are thought leaders, anyone just sharing and expressing their viewpoints online that I find intriguing, but also developing a relationship with ourselves so we understand how we create our reality by the way that we consume and create our own content in our day-to-day. And then lastly, really centering on belief systems, like the belief system that we have with our creator, if you believe in a creator, and that source, what drives you, what belief systems come through you, what do you actually believe in and why? So a lot of that is going to require questioning. It's going to require thinking. It's going to require stopping and pausing, and it takes time. But I'm willing to, and if you're willing to join me here for this Kelly Steele experience video. If you haven't heard of Kelly Steele, she's been making a lot of noise, or people have been making a lot of noise about her, because she recently came on a podcast called the Dear Fuchi. Why do I keep saying Fuchi? I recorded this video like several times because it was getting too long. There was so much to think about. And for some reason, Fuchi keep coming out of my mouth. Anyway, Kelly Steele is a pastor's wife, mother, speaker, and co-author of the book Love Letters, written with her husband, Jeremy Steele. Together, they've told the story of their marriage across pulpits and platforms, a journey they describe as redemption through obedience, faith, and divine order. But when Kelly appeared on the Dear Future Wifey podcast, her story pulled something different out of people. She talked about staying with a man who was unfaithful. She shared how she ironed his clothes while he went to see another woman. She described it as an assignment from God, something she endured because she believed in the outcome she saw in a dream, a marriage, a family, a ministry. That story didn't land gently. Some people felt inspired by her convictions. Others were deeply unsettled. Some called it faith. Others called it brainwashing. But behind the backlash is a conversation worth having. This experience isn't about picking a side. I'm using this experience as a mirror. These are questions worth sitting with. Why do we cling so tightly to stories that aren't ours? What are we hoping to gain when we criticize or shame someone who already lived through their situation? How well do we know the belief systems we say we live by? Are we reacting because something feels wrong or because we never created a better blueprint ourselves? And when we're triggered, how do we respond with clarity, not just correction? You're welcome to bring your thoughts here. But this invitation isn't just about reacting. It's to reflect and maybe even build something more honest with what you find. I want us to use this as a mirror for ourselves to develop better systems so that we know how to navigate this earth together with more intention. And speaking of systems, I want to give a quick shout out to Garden. I'm an ambassador for Garden, and I love ambassadoring brands that help us through our processes. So for those who want to garden and want to be intentional about how they consume not only the content around them in their world, but the content that they feed their mouths and their tongue to give them life, Garden is one of those systems that help you transition, or it provides an easy way for you to create those salads over and over again instead of having to go to the store. So there's an investment here, and I have a QR code on the screen and a link below if you want $100 off the Garden system so that you can have some reference, some resource to help you be intentional about bringing in your intentional eating habits indoors. But let's go ahead and put up a T-chart. I'm going to put up a T-chart. On one side, I have Kelly. On the other side, I have comments and stories. So what my goal is here is to present a few questions that stood out to me, or it was inspired because I reviewed this content, probably invested way too much time in reviewing the Kelly experience because it's exciting, y'all. There are people who are really angry about the fact that this was even showcased. But when things like this happen, there's opportunities. There's opportunities for us to think, to sit, think, reflect. I said think, reflect, think for ourselves, to not just go into the herd and start to sabotage someone's life because of the way they think or the order that they thought, but to really consider, why are we so upset and what are we going to do about it? So I want to start here. I heard about Kelly on the radio. She was on a radio station promoting her book called The Love Letters. And I thought in my head, love letters, that sounds cute. Oh, adorable. And then I leaned in and I heard a little of their story, but not too much because it was a short segment about just the book itself. Then later on in that same day, I'm living my life in America and I go on Instagram, the social media outlet, and there's the book. I recognized the book because I saw the love letters. And there was Kelly and her husband. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I watched a clip that came across my news feed and my algorithm. I didn't think too much of it. There was probably a line that stood out to me, but not too deep. But I go to the comments and wow. The comments are commenting. The comments are commenting. You know how they say life is life, and I'm trying to do that with comments, but I don't think it's working. But the comments were interesting, and it definitely inspired me to want to reach out to Kelly to learn more, especially when I did have that moment in time when I thought, that was an interesting way for her to say that. And I'm interested in how everyone responded. I'm going to take all of this in and I'm going to see if she would be interested in having an interview with me. And she said yes. And I'm thankful for that experience. I have that link in the description box below. That is on my podcast called Earth Experiences. When I want to dig into the creator's experience and learn about their content, the way that they think outside of the limited exposure I have, if I have some quality questions. So she said yes. And I was thankful. And so through this podcast, I had a few questions that stood out to me. I wanted to learn a little bit more. She really shared a lot of what she already shared in the Dear Future Wifey podcast, but there were some other areas in there that I think she was able to elaborate on. In this journey of the Kelly Steele experience, you'll see her in other comment boxes as people start to give their commentary. She goes on other lives, and she also participated in a live on the Dear Future Wifey live on Instagram, which gave more context to her story. This is the most profound experience. Why did I use profound? I don't know why I used the word profound, but this experience stood out to me so much because Kelly was active. She was active in these comments, and I'm not sure if she was active because when you get on the internet and you realize that people are creating their own stories, that it can be a little bit overwhelming and you're trying to like redeem yourself, or if she sincerely just wanted people to understand, I'm not sure. But the internet itself has formed some unwritten rules that if someone makes a mistake, you must go at them. Go get them, Tiger. Go get them. They did something wrong. And we don't sit and reflect that we also make mistakes. Now, sometimes going after them, the shame, it makes sense. Like, for instance, if we are shaming someone for being a manipulator in a way that makes people, a whole system, I can't think about it. I was going to say manipulator, but of course, in this case, we saw manipulation. But there are people out there that's intentionally being evil. Like they're not making these decisions because they don't know or lack of knowledge. They just intentionally know that they're doing evil and they want to do evil. Shame them, right? Like make their feelings on these thoughts horrible. Or there's a group of people who are doing these ridiculous things because they were taught to do it. And so they once were the little children in life who grew up to be these adults and they remained immature. So they still think like a child. Now, I'm going to go into the last section of my podcast with Kelly, because this was an important question for me, and it's the foundation of how I want us to go through this experience, is belief systems are important here. Understanding how someone believes versus how I believe is going to allow me not to get so jumbled up in the words that they say. If you don't take anything from this video, when we're consuming people's content, consider that you won't be able to control everyone's thoughts and how they say a line or say a word or how they present their story. What your power is how you respond to the story. Because even if we had all of it in us to go out and tell people, this is how you do it, this is how you say it, they may not do it. And we have stories upon stories in books, in the Bible, in our own worlds that says if somebody's going to do something, they're going to do it. In some cases, somebody might be inspired because there's an example, or somebody has great leadership and guidance in their lives that they trust. But in some cases, if people are going to make dumb decisions, they're going to make these dumb decisions, regardless of what foundation they have. Now, my question to Kelly was about why does she believe in God? So I'm going to play this clip for us really quickly. I mean, not as quickly, but I'm going to play it for us now.
Yeah.
All right, so last question. Why do you believe in God?
I believe in Jesus because from a little girl, I knew there was something bigger than me. I didn't know what it was, but I can remember longing to know what it was, probably from the age of 4. And I always felt like there was something more to this world. And I actually had a near-death experience when I was 10, drowning in a pool. And I was trying to save my friend from swimming. And as I was drowning, I finally gave up fighting because I was, couldn't breathe. And I had one of those near-death experiences where everything went black. I saw a light and I wanted to go. And I didn't think about my mom, my dad, my dog, nothing. I just wanted to be wherever that light was. And when I woke up on the side of the pool, I'm still here. I longed for where I was going for probably a year as a child, wanting to go there. It wasn't until later I realized that the feeling I felt was the Holy Spirit just magnified a million times. And I have no doubt that there's a life after this life, that there is something bigger for us all here. And it's indescribable. And one day we're all going to see Jesus as he is.
Okay. So the point here is whenever we have the opportunity to understand a person or to consider where they're coming from, especially when it comes to these hard conversations about religion, spirituality, we must understand where a person cores. Why do they believe the things that they believe? Because that's going to help us with that friction, especially if we don't believe the same thing. So Kelly believes in God. She's had an experience with God that allows her to grab onto that experience. Now, even with my role with faith, I understand that there are things that might be confusing. There might be things I don't have the answer to. But because of something particular, because of a case that I had, I know that this makes sense to me, that holding on to this belief system makes sense to me. Now, when people are battling about religion and they have comments about, why they're no longer in a church or why the theologies and doctrines in church are causing so much harm, one thing to consider is I don't believe that people are intentionally, not all of them, are coming to this agreement with God because they want to go out and harm people. Most of the time they have their testimony because they've had an experience and they hold tight to it and they really want other people to know about it. But we also have room to believe that there are people who inside of the church or outside of the church just have bad intentions and they are manipulators. There's also people who are just ignorant inside the church or outside the church. When I started reading a book called Ecclesiastes in the Bible, I thought this makes sense. Because no matter how we frame it, there's always a case on one side or the other. As we listen to Kelly's content, we have people who understand it and believe it because they probably match that belief system. And then there are people who are against it and they're finding every single reason to be against whatever she says or to find fault in it because they hate the whole system and all. And this is where we have to be slow, or we have to think slowly. Because when we have a core belief system, and we share with others on both sides, whether it's Kelly sharing her belief system or people who don't believe in Kelly's belief system sharing theirs, we need to learn, or I would consider learning this, because I keep telling people what to do, but y'all gonna do what y'all want to do, and I'm gonna do what I want to do, and I'm doing my best to live in America. But it might be helpful for us to consider that listening to a person's word instead of finding a way for them to be wrong because we don't believe in their ultimate belief system could be beneficial in actually moving forward in a conversation. When we are just having a conversation to be right or leaving our comments to be right instead of actually listening to what a person's saying and twisting their words, it really gives both you and the person lack of credibility, because you don't have the space to really think clearly. It's not balanced at all. You are one-sided because you can only see your one way. But who's to say that there's a side that's completely right and there's a side that's completely wrong, because each side has their nuances. Now, I put this particular comment up on the screen because this is a time where people are in the comments, and I, again, this is not about saying somebody is bad or good about what they're saying, but just analyze it and responding to my triggers. But my triggers are when people are in the comments and they make up stories and it's not exactly what the person says, or they don't have intel into that person's lives to make the comment that they're saying so short. It's almost as if everyone becomes an expert on strangers' lives or the lives of strangers. And I'm wondering, how did everybody become this expert? So this commenter says, he hates you, ma'am. He hated you 32 years ago and he still hates you today. Love yourself. Now, we don't have any record that she doesn't love herself, and we don't have any record that he hates her. This story that we're listening to was about what they overcame years ago, and they now have this new experience. The story itself doesn't have to belong to us. It belongs to them. One of the biggest revelations that I had was having a conversation with someone on my podcast about Job's story. And this person doesn't necessarily follow religion anymore or believe in God in the way that they used to. But when we went through this conversation, this pullout was Job's story doesn't have to be your story. And I mean, it blew my mind. I don't know why, because I kept thinking about Job's story with such heaviness. Like, why did this happen? I had so many questions around it. And that's the authenticity around it. I don't approach the Bible and just pretend that everything is right. If I don't understand it, I'm clear about the fact that I don't understand it. But Job's story is one where I grabbed onto, because I'm thinking, if I'm trying my best to do right and then I'm set up for failure, but then everything that I love is taken away, like, I don't understand that. And people will have their different stories around it. There were different ways of preaching about it, and it still hasn't set. But when I realized that everyone's story in the Bible doesn't mean that it has to be my story, but it's something I can learn from and be inspired by, I'm running. This is what I want us to all consider. How can we learn and be inspired by someone's story versus it dictating our whole world and our whole thought processes, and then also dictating the fake stories that we're creating by someone else's life? So how can I be inspired by this story? What can I learn from it, even if it's not going to mirror exactly what they did? What am I learning about myself and what I appreciate and what I want to see? All right, so I'm going to go to this next section in our T-chart, and this is about a comment that I seen on the actual video page itself. But before we get to there, I'm going to play a clip from the Dear Future Wifey podcast that pretty much sums and matches this comment.
Mm-hmm. They're going to look at it like, see, that's that struggle love they talking about. I don't want it.
Right.
I don't want this struggle love. I don't want to have to deal with a man that has to go through all that and me lower my standard, lower my value, lower everything that I know that I am as a woman to work through the cultivation of a man, for a man to be in this broken state, disrespectful, calling me out my name, parading women in front of me, and then I'm going to pray for his deliverance and pray. No, God, I need the reformed man. Bring me the man that after he's been set free and delivered. I don't want that process.
They want that finished product.
So my question to you, because only you can say that, what would you, because I don't even want to say advice, how can you reframe or state, because this is your story, this is your journey,
my story.
It's your story.
Right.
Sure.
What would you say to the women that may be looking at this and saying, see, that's that nonsense they talking about?
Well, I would say that's why you're single still. Because I'm sure somebody had been in your life already.
You don't pick the fight. You don't,
and you didn't want to give the investment for that person to become somebody, and then you lost them probably a long time ago. And you should have just worked with them from the beginning and just worked out the kinks and worked it out, because a man can always build. Money can always be made, and that's what we do. We build a life together. And I'm so thankful that that's what we've done. And that's why I think I value and love you so much, because we've built our life. And so they miss that building process because they want to come into it already done. Now, I get it. Eve was put on the earth with everything done. I get it. That's why women want things to be set and done, because Eve showed up and everything was named and it was just there.
Wow.
But at the same time, God can give women a resilience, because we're a helpmeet for a reason. And we're supposed to help meet the need and help complete the man. I know it's going to cause a fight with that too, but I'm very into that, because I'm living it. I'm a living example of it works. When you line up your life and get behind your man that is following God, that's submitted to God, and you say, Lord, what can I do to make him better? Your life overall becomes better.
So we are now listening to Kelly's belief system. This is what Kelly believes. Does not mean that everyone needs to believe in the same doctrine or rhetoric. This is her story. As we heard the podcast host, he kept saying, "This your story. This your story," right? You got to hear that in the back of your mind as well. This is their story. And even though we don't want people to share their story, let's actually go into this comment, because this is going to bring us full circle for this part. This comment is about the experience in the podcast. Like, it was very thoughtful. They really shared all of their heart. And it inspired me to want to share it, because there's so much here that I'm not going to unpack, but I am going to share what inspires me because of this comment. So this says, I wish this never aired. It wasn't inspiring at all. It's really depressing. This wasn't God's will, and church folks got to stop with this kind of rhetoric. I watched this video and he didn't want to marry her. He was an hour late to the wedding because he didn't want her. He cheated at his bachelor's party the night before the wedding because he didn't want her. He settled for her. He was not God's choice for her, and this is why she went through pure hell with him. To be clear, he didn't like her looks. His words. He didn't like her. His words. He was facing prison and so-called made a deal with God to do right and put her through pure hell in the process. This was not God's will for her life. This was what she wanted for herself. The man that God had for her would have never caused her heart to break like that. God is love, and this wasn't it. She ironed his clothes because he was going to the side chick house regardless. So she did what she needed to do to make herself feel better. This was mental, emotional, psychological abuse, and nothing of God. So please stop with the nonsense. People take God's word out of context and use it for their own benefit. God would never want his daughter treated like this. This shows a lack of love for herself and a lack of self-respect for herself. She chose this because of unhealed child trauma from her parent divorce. Nothing about this is God. And and forgive me, sometimes I get dramatic when reading the comments because of the voice I'm hearing, and I'm disconnecting myself from the person itself. But I have to recognize that. So a lot of time I'm recognizing that I made that voice and I probably shouldn't have, because I don't really know why the person commented in this manner and what they felt in their heart. But I will say that it feels like, and it seems like, based off of the words she said and the effort that she put into it, that this really bothered her. And she really wanted to stand up for some cause and some right and really tell Kelly about herself, that she had low self-esteem and that she didn't love herself. But Kelly also shares this on her own accord. So it's interesting in how we respond to the parts of the content and when we respond to it, because the timing of it is not now. And if we do believe in God, in this case, we're looking at somebody who seems to be upset with church folks. But that's also something to consider, that I don't know if we all met all the church folks in the United States of America and if they all just have done the worst, but perhaps we haven't. And perhaps we put too much power and emphasis on the man itself versus the relationship we have with God. And I know that sounds a little cliche. I used to hear people say that all the time about the relationship with God. And it felt disconnected because I didn't know what type of relationship we could have with God. At a young age, it just felt very look at the Bible and look at the words and follow it in a logical way. But there is a relationship that you can actually have with God, but it's very spiritual and it doesn't look like it should on the physical level to the common person. But what are your thoughts here? How are you receiving the commenter? How are you receiving what Kelly said? If you slow down and listen to Kelly's word, do you feel like she's being judgmental to single women, or do you feel like she's just sharing a perspective as she would maybe in her own home with her daughters, and others have that same case? Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to share another quote from Kelly, and I'm going to match it with a parody that I saw online. And I imagine that this parody reflects a lot of different comments that I saw in the comments amongst all different creators responding to Kelly's experience. I'm calling it the Kelly Steele experience, but it's really her and her husband coming on to different platforms, talking about their book, as well as Kelly coming onto individual platforms to comment and to be on their lives to share her perspective. So let's look at what Kelly says in this section. I think this is where a lot of people found her words troubling and found that spiritual conversations or conversations about God can look differently for other people. So here's what Kelly said here.
And I realized that God loves me, that God has a purpose and plan for my life, that God chose me, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Yeah. So he would call me out my name. It wouldn't bother me because I allowed God's voice to be louder than his. And when I was going through transition of him not coming home on the weekends, not being there, telling me I hate you, I'll never love you, I wish I never married you, I knew that life and death is in the power of the tongue through the word of God. So I would say, you will love me one day. We will have a good marriage one day. And although he would go out for weekends, I would literally help him get ready to go meet a side chick by ironing his clothes and getting them ready for the night. And these are all things I was graced to do. I would not encourage anybody to do that unless you are graced by God to do this. But once I knew who I was, I realized, oh, the enemy's after him. So I began to pray for him, not for my husband before, but as a soul.
Okay, so the line that triggered a lot of people is, I was graced to do this. She's talking about her relationship with God also in her narrative. And people who are religious or follow the same Bible or any of the sort are saying this is not of God. So let's check out this parody from another creator about the video in all. And then I'll share some questions for us to review.
And that's why you have to have radical faith. Not lukewarm faith, not normal faith, radical faith. And I got so deep into the word of God, and this would help me keep going. So when he told me he did not want to be with me, he hated me, he wished he never married me, he wished I was never born, I knew that that was a joke. God specifically told me that he didn't mean that. What? When I said that? Because life and death is in the power of the tongue, and God's voice was louder than his.
Gabriel, hold this.
His voice was saying, oh, please divorce me, please, please, please. And I said no, because God didn't say you meant that. God said you just playing. You know what I'm saying? So
I didn't say that.
It was funny because, you know, he's with his side chicks every day of the week. You know, well, he had days. He would rotate. It would be like Tasha on Tuesdays. It would be Teresa on Thursdays, Wanda on Wednesdays, stuff like that. And I said, how can I help? And God gave me the assignment. God put this on my blackboard, okay? God told me, you know, prepare him for those other women. I would pack his lunch, you know, because how can you cheat on me and how can you have the energy to do that if you're not on a full stomach? I'm doing what he needs to be done so he can be there for the side chick so he can come home to me eventually.
Oh, me?
You know, and God said that. God told me to do that. And then I did. And that's what I did. And that was my assignment. So if that's not your assignment, then it's not yours. But this was what he told me to do, capital H. All right, watch this.
All right. So this stood out to me because, one, we're making fun of the story. I get why we're making fun of the story. This is what we do when we don't understand something. We make fun of it. But it also goes towards some of the triggers that I had. I laugh at some dark things. And I think that my sense of humor is pretty out there. However, once I start to think about sensitive stories like this, I try to consider, what do we want from Kelly? I made this a Kelly Steele experience because obviously she's the one who's been through the abuse. She's the one who chose the abuse. But also she's mentioning that God was a part of this process for her. Now, I know that it's very difficult to put God in the midst of some of these choices. But if we truly believe in God, God is in everything. And even when we're making these mistakes, he's right by us. So we see examples of this in some of the stories we have in the Bible, where we're identifying people who are making decisions that aren't graced by God, but God still gives them grace and mercy, and God is in the direction. So maybe it's just an understanding or the way that it's communicated, but how could it be that God is not with her when she's making these decisions? Why do we believe that God is not a part of the journey? And I can also be communicating this wrong, but I would just sit here to say that it seems like people were upset at the sin. Like, we hate the fact that someone was manipulated. We hate the fact that someone was lied to. These are all things that God also hates. So we share the fact that that is what we all are upset about. But when we think about the other aspect of love and the fruits of the Spirit, is it easier for us to function in the fruit of the Spirit, or to kind of go through all of the fruits of the flesh and just figure it out for the best? I find in my own life that if I purposely, intentionally look at how to operate in the fruit of spirits, that's kindness, that's gentleness. What does that actually look like in action? When we're responding to someone who had a sensitive journey probably years ago and is able to come on here and maybe laugh about it herself, maybe there is room to have a parody because she's seemingly okay with it. But at the same time, if you made the content or you responded to the content because you did feel like this was a bad situation, are you mad at her because she didn't have the knowledge? Are you mad at her because you feel like she intentionally was ignorant and chose to do this because she didn't have any self-esteem? Even if this was the case, isn't there some room for us to consider, like, wow, she had low self-esteem. I wonder where that came from, versus like, she's stupid. You foolish. The other part that I think about in this case is those who consider themselves Christians and how they respond to the content and saying that's not God's voice gives an opportunity for people to look through the scriptures and see, what does God's voice look like? What happens when God is speaking? And did God ever do anything foolish or require anyone to do anything foolish? There was only a few that I could point out, and there may be others people can share in the comments, where I saw, okay, today in the physical world, I don't know how that would go. So we're looking at Abraham's story. We know Abraham seemingly was going to sacrifice his son. If we're looking at it from reading the Bible with no one to interpret, or for no one to understand, or for us not to have a relationship with God and ask for that guidance and wisdom, that seems off. That seems very foolish. And we would be upset about that as well. This is why this Kelly Steele experience brings out so many different topics, because when it comes to understanding the Bible, Christians themselves have different ideologies or different understandings of what God is saying through these words. And that's always confusing, because who's dominated? Because there's one thing to have someone come into these churches and try to manipulate people so they don't believe in God, or to mess things up so people don't believe in God. There's another thing for people to sincerely want to believe in God and just don't have it all together, and they're trying their best. But there are multiple different sections of that, of people trying their best, but they're also having their own understanding of what one narrative means. So throughout all these different narratives, can we trust that God is with everyone? Can we trust that God's voice is just different for church by church or person by person? It's just a question to consider. But if you have an ear to hear this and you determine that you are a Christian, there's so many other choices that we have. We have freedom of speech. We have free will. We have the freedom to judge someone. We have freedom to say, oh, you have low self-esteem and make fun of them. But we also have the freedom of our choice to have questions, to consider another part of the story, to even go back in the history of like, why is it that we have people who will put themselves in this position to have low self-esteem? What do we want out of the criticism? What do we want out of the humiliation? What do we want when we talk about people in this way? Like, do we think that because we laugh about it, that it's going to make her say, oh, I am a fool? Maybe. Do you think she's going to change her whole life around? I imagine that people who get criticized or made fun of, they do find something in themselves to like say, I'm going to change my world. Or they may find that they want to stick up for themselves. And so whatever you say just won't stick at all because it's not coming in love. You're coming in another fruit. And I'm not sure what you do with that fruit. But the last thing I'll say about God's voice is if you decide to go through those scriptures and to look at the different experiences that God is speaking, you will find questions. You will also find wrath. You might even see God calling someone out and calling them things. So I see all different types of aspects where we're meeting the Bible in a very live experience. And the Bible is really exposing who we are, just like this algorithm and the mirror that I keep mentioning. We are learning about who we are by how we respond to content and our behavior thereafter. But some things to consider. Let's go ahead and continue my thought process. So there are a lot of things that I'm thinking about when I'm engaging, but too much for me to really go through. However, if you decide to go through these experiences with me, you'll see that there's a common thread. The common thread is we are still all figuring out this blueprint together. And everyone has a different story. And as long as someone is intentionally trying their best, give them the opportunity to do that, just like you would give yourself the opportunity to do so. I want to go on to this next section. This is about religion and if it's the problem. Is religion a problem? Because many of the comments reflected was, this is why I don't go to church, or this is why you can't trust this, or this is spiritual bypass. And there's a lot of narrative about what's wrong with the church based off of this one couple coming on to a podcast. And I'm interested in where we get our evidence from when it comes to all the other experiences that can exist. Do we believe that when people come on and because they show their lives and they show maybe the worst case scenarios, that represents everything? So let's take a look at this clip.
I knew I wasn't his preference. My husband dated little Latina girls with long hair and big titties.
You got to remember, I'm from Arizona.
In fact, when he first met me, he's like, you're cute, but you're a little heavier than what I'm used to. And I go, well, what are you used to? He's like, I'm used to, $1.20, $1.25. I said, well, I'm almost $2. So I don't know what to say here.
I'm almost $10. I love it. So why are you so self-aware though? How did you become that?
I guess I'm just a realist when it comes to it. I understand. It is what it is. I mean, just because I'm not his preference don't mean he's not gonna, like this. I mean, he's been coming back for 32 years.
Well, 30 to be 35 this December if you add up the other years.
But some people may look at that as you have low self-esteem.
Probably, maybe. And like you said, I had no value, had no worth. And I said that from the beginning. I said, I didn't know who I was. And I was just very, open and honest about that. But I was confident that we should be together.
Okay. What I noticed here is people have comments about Kelly's low self-esteem. But you notice that she also mentioned that she had low self-esteem. Listening to keywords, that she had low self-esteem. So somewhere in her mind, she believes that her self-esteem is no longer in the place that it was before. However, when people are listening to the story, they're listening to that it happened at all. And maybe that people are laughing. But are we supposed to be police on how we do everything as it relates to our own story? Can I laugh at my trauma? Can I be okay with that? Just because I decide to laugh at my trauma doesn't mean that I want you to laugh at yours if you don't want to laugh at it. But we can't all have these picture perfect experiences and not appreciate that there's transparency here. Like, this is their honest truth. And they didn't hide it. They were honest about it. That key word of honesty or transparency or just the truth, it resonated with me because when I was looking through the scriptures at this portion of my thought process, I'm thinking, well, how do we reflect on the fact that she had low self-esteem and she was okay with it, but she also was under God? We have to start to organize, because was she under God when she first got in this marriage? Not necessarily. So she's working from a place where she wasn't clearly understanding what it means to be in a relationship with God. And so if that shifted, this is what we imagine a relationship with God requires. It requires a new creature. So this is a new relationship. And even though people say they are in a religion or they say they're under God, we even hear from her husband that it wasn't adopted properly. So what we're looking for is truth. And even if the truth is ugly and we don't like it and it doesn't have a pretty picture, the truth is what we can learn from. So some of the stories that I thought about in this moment is, okay, so there was a comment that says, I need an episode where the pastor's wife cheats for 5 years and he's making her a bubble bath when she returns. And now this is not the same section here, but there's a section in the podcast where he wants to be forgiven, or he shows his forgiveness by, humbling himself. And this commenter is really saying, like, we've heard women in this position always lowering themselves in order to satisfy the man's desires. But when do we see it on the other end? And this is going to go into our next session about love and how we define love and what that looks like. But in this moment alone, it just requires us to think about what we believe in actually. Like, if we actually believe the stories in the Bible. Because if I look at Kelly's experience, I can see that she actually took the words for what it was, and she believed that she saw a benefit from it. Now, this can seem like it doesn't match what God's plans are or what God's ways would be. But I'm having a theory here that if we decided to follow God's plan without our foolish decisions, as we see here is this foolishness, it probably won't be as messy as this. But it eventually will lead to order. It just takes a lot of getting those roots up. But that might be a little messy. And so when we see the story that's true and honest, even if we don't like it, it's still representing and glorifying what we see it's supposed to be like eventually. Now, we all can decide to find the perfect person, but are we also the perfect person? Or are we trying to match the person who's on our same level, whatever that may be, that will satisfy our needs? At the end of the day, if you have matching belief systems and you can reference where those belief systems come from and there's order in that, there might be helpfulness there. All right, so let's go to this next comment. I think this is probably one of my favorite, and this is my favorite section of my journey with the Kelly Steele content.
Well, my daughter once married to a really great guy, and I thank God that she's got married. In fact, she was in an abusive relationship where she had twins, and she left him while she was 9 months pregnant. And I'm so proud of her because I believe, because me always talking with her dad and I, and giving her the strength to know who she is, she knew to leave that abusive relationship about 2 weeks before she gave birth to twins. And she stayed single for a few years till she met her husband. And I really think for me, that's a blessing, because she knew enough within herself not to stay in a bad situation and to expose what was really happening. And so it flipped, it went opposite, because my daughters did know what family looks like and what abuse is not okay. And that you have a safe place to land with your family that will always be 10 toes down for you. So my other daughter is single because she's very selective for a reason. She doesn't want to just be with, and she has a very high, very low tolerance level. I think a little bit too low, to be honest. But she's very, like, she knows what she wants, and she's one. I'll tell her, you might have to get a guy with a little gut that works at Amazon, and he's just a good guy, instead of waiting for your Chris Brown lookalike, and I just so I think I've got two extremes. But the good thing is, all five of my kids have so far been in strong relationships or no relationship at all, and they're just productive, great young adults.
Yeah. Even though this is content that's controversial, it makes you think, it makes you upset, it makes you mad. There's also an opportunity to think about, how can we do better? How can we do better with our choices, with this type of content? Because here's the thing, this is years ago, so they're still understanding life from that point of view. We now live in a certain world where we are putting language on everything. You'll see this in one of the contents I'll share at the end, where the therapist comes on. They really clearly communicated that they did not know, but we're looking at their old decisions in this new space, and we don't make sense of it because they did it back then. But I think the disconnect is, and this is where I can understand why people are in outrage, is it still seems like Kelly is trying to push the narrative of, one, that women can handle abuse a lot better than men. And we're going to talk about this in the standard section, but also that your identity is attached to your marriage or this man, where we also have instances in the scriptures where Paul's like, don't even get married, y'all. Don't even. So there is room for all different types of decisions. All right, so this comment says, I want Black women to experience love that doesn't require being dragged through hell first. May a relationship like this never find me. And that was key. Everybody kept saying that line. May this never find me. No one said it was going to find you, y'all. We got to start looking for the stories that we want to find us. It's interesting because I've been thinking about, how do I form the way that I speak if I want to bring something into my life, right? Should I say, I don't want this, I never want this? Or should I say, this is what I want? It's just the shifting of language, I believe, has power, because now if I say, I never want that, that's crazy, that's this, and I hate that, I don't know what comes from that. I can identify that to help me form the synthesis and the life that I want, but I don't want to lead with the never and the don't language. That's just a personal choice, something to consider. I want this love. I want this beauty. I want this security. Whatever that is, get it, or I have it, or I'm thankful for what I have now. Like, just being in this space where, what is it that works, instead of focusing so much on what doesn't. And this is where the inspiration comes from, because Kelly's story is not going to land in the right places all the time. But even in this understanding of, like, God working through all things and God being everywhere, how do you see God working through this experience when it comes to you? Like, do you hear this experience and say, you know what? That's not right. That's not God's love. And this is where I can reference God's love and identify what I really need. But I'm thankful that they were able to share their experience, and I still saw God work for them. But there's another route for me. So let's go to this next section. This next section is about, how do you define love? Where do you get your blueprint for love? I imagine that the blueprint for love is for those who consider themselves Christians, those who have an ear, those who read the Bible, have a relationship with God, will use the Bible as a reference. So in this case, I'm going to pull up 1 Corinthians 13. I'm going to pull up 1 Corinthians 13. Why, y'all? Because hello. This is what Paul, the same man who was like, don't get married, he starts to give some instructions on what love is. Okay? And if someone is a believer and they take this as a blueprint, we notice that there is not gender identification on how to love. So in one section, and you can check this out in our podcast, I'm not going to share it right now, but we talked about standards of love. Actually, let's go ahead and check that. Let me see. We talk about standards of love. Now, Kelly is talking about her daughters here, which I think is a really good call out. So let's take a look at what she says, and then we're going to come back to 1 Corinthians 13 and look at what does it mean to love according to those who actually believe in the Bible. Again, we're looking at those who actually believe in it, right? We're not looking at people who don't believe in it. And if you're communicating with people, that initial chart of what are my belief systems versus the belief system of someone else, if they don't match, then you can't force them to believe what you want. You have to identify that you have different belief systems and then respond accordingly. I understand that that's a different belief system. I don't own it. They own it. But this is what I'm learning from their experience and how to even use this experience to be a better communicator on what I believe is edification.
Well, my daughter once married to a really great guy, and I thank God that she's got married. In fact, she was in an abusive relationship where she had twins, and she left him while she was 9 months pregnant. And I'm so proud of her because I believe because me always talking with her dad and I, and giving her the strength to know who she is, she knew to leave that abusive relationship about 2 weeks before she gave birth to twins. And she stayed single for a few years till she met her husband. And I really think for me, that's a blessing because she knew enough within herself not to stay in a bad situation and to expose what was really happening. And so it flipped, it went opposite, because my daughters did know what family looks like and what abuse is not okay. And, that you have a safe place to land with your family that will always be 10 toes down for you. So my other daughter is single because she's very selective for a reason. She doesn't want to just be with, and she has a very high, very low tolerance level. I think a little bit too low, to be honest. But she's very, she knows what she wants. And she's one, I'll tell her, you might have to get a guy with a little gut that works at Amazon, and he's just a good guy instead of waiting for, your Chris Brown lookalike, and I just, so I think I've got two extremes, but the good thing is all 5 of my kids have so far, been in strong relationships or no relationship at all. And they're just productive, great young adults.
Yeah. I noticed throughout a lot of the things that Kelly shares that she has a lot of pride and being a mom and having her children and having this marriage. And that's a belief system around love that she really held on to. Let's take a look at this other clip from Kelly. And she talks about really where her belief system are formed as it relates to how her husband dealt with her in the marriage. And I think this is another good pull out of understanding her belief system when it comes to us building. What does love mean to you? What is the foundation of love? Because I want you all to invite yourself into answering that question for yourself. Where do you get your blueprint for love to say that's not it?
I'm 17,
of course,
so I'm a teenager, and I was preconditioned to think this way because my mother divorced my father for infidelity, and I'd always thought if you could just forgive him, our family would stay together.
Oh, that's deep.
So that was not a deal breaker for me, as long as I knew about it. Now, he knows if I found out about it, we'd have a problem.
But if he told you in advance, you'd be okay.
Yeah.
So if he said, hey, listen, tomorrow I got this little shorty lined up. I'm going to go run through and I'm going to smash it. I'll see you the next day.
He would never say that.
It was usually after the fact.
Yeah.
Hey, I had a hiccup last night. Just heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A hiccup.
You would say it after the fact? Right. As long as he confessed prior from you finding out, you said that's cool. Yeah. That's okay.
In fact, before he married me, he's like, I don't know if I'll ever be faithful. And I said, that's okay. So I walked down the aisle knowing I was marrying his worst, meaning that if he were to do something, the worst would be him stepping out.
Okay. So I know people are mad at this, but when we think about the fairy tale, we want people to operate in love and it to all work out. But we don't know who that person is going to turn into because we can't put all of our trust in man that nothing different will happen from day one. Interestingly, here, from day one, she signed up and said it was okay because what she really signed up for was loving a person completely. This is the closest that you have to unconditional love that you might have with your children, where they can have all these flaws and you still love them. people are going to look at that differently. If people have like a spiritual sense, I think she was operating from the physical, because I don't know if they actually was inside of their relationship with God at this point in the beginning of their marriage. But spirituality is so interesting, because sometimes these physical decisions like turn the other cheek and loving your enemy, this is a case of loving your enemy. And that's for those who actually believe in the Bible, like that's an instruction. She should extremely show love to her enemy. What does that look like in practice? And I think that's what she's trying to communicate, and it's just not going to hit in every corner, because it has to be a spiritual experience partly as well. Some of this might be like, oh, that was on her own doing. That's what she wanted. The other part is you had to have a spiritual eye. The third part is she's learning things from her childhood. So we have so many different areas to choose from. If she's learning from her childhood, we imagine that people who grew up as children and had influenced by their parents are just going to magically grow up and be mature. Some of these people they're magically delicious. Not magically, but they grow up, they become adults by their body and their stature, but their minds are still based off of the young mind. They haven't matured. What we really want is for people to mature. This is why I like 1 Corinthians 13, because we get through all of that. I want to stay here with y'all, but I won't make this too long. Love is patient. Okay, let's do it. You're going to have to stay here with me. We're going to go slow, and it's going to be a little deep. And I'm not going to make it too deep, but it is deep. Because at the end of the day, this is all simple. What I really want to communicate is, over and over again in this content, is what if we focus on how to love well? What does that look like? If we all operated in how to love well, we would be able to see it better. We'd be able to experience it better. We would interpret it a lot differently. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now, you could read this and some parts might be like, I don't know what that means. I'm going to just highlight parts that are my favorite and what relates to the Kelly Steele experience and all. First, I said I wanted us to be a mirror for ourselves. Going into that mirror makes me think about the person who decides to be a Christian and follow this content automatically. And it also makes me think about any other person who doesn't believe in that same faith or belief system. The mirror is always going to be there. What are the questions or what are the answers that you want from whatever feedback or triggers you had in this experience? Allow that to be your mirror. So on those so-called Christians, if we look at the Bible and we believe the Bible and you say, it says, put down a stone if you are not the what am I talking about? For those who haven't sinned, when Christ was coming to the rescue of a sinner, they said she was a hoe. Christ said, if y'all haven't sinned, go ahead and put down a stone. I mean, pick up the stone and stone her. If you have sinned, you're going to put it down. I'm messing this up, so I'll put the reference on the screen. The idea is that no one could put that stone down. No one could pick it up and throw because they all had issues. When we're reviewing the content, can you always pick it up and throw it? And why do you have the right to throw it at her? Go back to the mirror. Go back to understanding these things. The other part is the mote in your eye. That's another reference of before you start to judge someone, clear out your eyes so you can see yourself in the mirror. Because I imagine if I start looking at myself in the mirror and understand the questions and my own triggers, I would know why I responded to Kelly's content the way that I did. My inspiration is that, wow, I believe we should have better stories. And I want to see evidence of better stories. And I believe there's evidence of better stories, especially when we go into cases like Christ and the 12 disciples. He knew that one was going to be off, but it was one. But we focus a lot on the negative. We focus a lot on these stories that make a case for the church is bad or there's everything wrong. We don't look for the cases where, oh, they're doing something good here. They're actually helping the community. They actually have plans inside of their churches. Going into this next part, we'll see that Kelly and her husband actually have counseling within their churches that invites those therapists into the conversations. We don't really hear about that. Hearing stories like that, helpful. This is the evidence that we need to look for. We can always find evidence of everything crumbling, but where do we find evidence of the carpenter lifestyle? Christ was a carpenter. We know a carpenter puts the blueprint down, so we know how to build. She mentions building a lot. Her building was one of those buildings where you had to, what is it called when you do the my uncle does this and I can't even remember what it's called. Anyway, it's messed up houses, but you come and you fix it up. Or you can have a house that you already built in. That's an opportunity too. That's already built for you. You design it. Or you can have a house that was lived in by someone else first, but you make it your own. How do you want to build or rebuild? But going back to our foundation of love and how to identify love, for Christians, it could be 1 Corinthians 13. For you, what is it? What was Kelly's belief system? All right, so now to the last thought, me doing my very best, y'all, to get through all of these thoughts. I hope if you stay here this far that most of this is making sense. I have to really make it clear that I am still developing and I'm understanding there are things that I don't know the answer to. But the one thing that I hold dear to is I want us to look on the good. I want us to find evidence of the good. I want us to be able to get into a circle and to communicate all the questions that we don't know the answer to and not be embarrassed to do so and not be embarrassed to communicate these things and have conversations, to not even be embarrassed to have a story like Kelly's and to share it and to get the feedback to see what's going on. So my last part is just about the experience when it came down to the live for the content, the podcast owner of this story. He had a live because he responded to a therapist, and I could be getting this wrong because I think she corrected him. It could be a therapist or a psychologist, or I want to play a little bit of a clip where she shares who she is so I don't get this wrong. But what I loved about this is that this type of experience invited this conversation where we all can sit around the table. It's one thing to be anonymous behind a comment or even show yourself behind a comment, but not say these things face to face, right? To someone. Imagine, like when I was in an interview with Kelly, I was shaking my head. Yes, because there are things that I agree with, but there was also things where I said, I'm like, I don't know. And then instead of like calling her names and telling her she's don't have no self-esteem, I just presented a question and I wanted to hear it. And even if the answer wasn't something I thought it should be, it still was something that didn't have to be without kindness, didn't have to be without grace. I know people kind of get like in the pantsy when people say like, it can't be all rainbows and butterflies, but I'm so curious, like, what do you want? Do y'all want thunderstorms and like slashes? Like, why aren't we able to communicate in a way that doesn't have to make someone small? Why can't you still have your opinion and your thoughts without trying to slash and tear away somebody's self-esteem along with the self-esteem that you're trying to protect, seemingly? But anyway, I wanted to say in this last section, this is my favorite because if a pastor ever comes to my page, I hope that I start to communicate this often. And that is when pastors get on the stage and they tell a story, there are people there just making up their own conclusions about what they said. It would be nice if the pastor would have a session where they all had questions and answers and people who were therapists or people who were experts in certain areas or had experiences in certain areas can really communicate what worked effectively and their errors and why that was wrong, instead of really just say, don't do this, don't do that. Give people a blueprint. I'm going to play this little clip, and this last clip is actually not from Kelly. It's from her husband himself, but I thought it was very important for this last section for us to even identify, because this is the case for a lot of us, and it's probably why we're mad at him without reason. Well, the commenters are upset, of course, with good reason, but there's other things to consider, and I think this is shared here in this section.
Not forget, Proverbs 18:22 says, he that finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Yep. I wish somebody would have echoed that scripture to me 35 years ago, because you can be in church and not become the church.
Right.
And I'm somebody that grew up in the church, but it was more inspiration and there was zero information. Shouting and the tambourines and God gonna do it, but nobody gave you the how.
Right. Trying to push her down.
Right.
But she has been my favor factor. I had no idea when I met her that I was going to be a pastor. And, you know, that I would be, you know, traveling and that she would be the one that would put feet and legs on my vision.
Let me ask you this, Reggie. Growing up as a PK, your father never said that to you? That you was going to be a pastor?
No.
And isn't that crazy? Your wife says it?
Yeah. My wife. You know, unfortunately, and I love my dad, R.I.P., but my dad always told me, because of your learning disability, if you're not running a ball or hitting one, what are you going to do with your life? Even when I started my church, my dad was like, you're not going to make it, because my dad went to seminary. I didn't. He's like, you got a learning disability and you a felon and you starting a church and a swap meet. Because we left my dad's church when I was 27 and we started going to a white church. And that's when the white pastor told me, he said, black men have a message, but y'all don't have methods. He said, you're here for methods. He said, because your message is not going to make you mega. Methods. I'm 27 years old. I didn't know Luke 16:12 says, how can you have your own if you haven't been faithful to another man's? So for 5 years, I rolled my sleeves up and I served that white pastor. And then I started my church, and she believed in me and gave me her paycheck. And Ephesians 3:20 says, now unto God who was able to do exceedingly abundantly above more than I could even imagine or even think. And my wife was the one telling me, you're going to the nations. It was my mother saying, you're going to the nations, not knowing that I would bump into a guy named Obed Martinez in Seattle, Washington. And he would tell me, man, I need to take you to Australia. Do you have and I need to take you to New Zealand. Have you ever been? I'm like, brother, I ain't never been to New York.
Forget a New Zealand.
Yeah, I'm like, I went to New Zealand before I made it to New York.
Yeah, that's true.
He was like, do you have a passport? I'm looking at my wife. What is that? But 6 weeks later, I had one. Hallelujah. And then here I am preaching on stage to thousands of people in New Zealand and Australia and London. And I mean, and the list goes on. You know, again, a man with a learning disability and a convicted felon. But this one right here told me when we got evicted from an apartment, I'll never forget, I said, you need to take Isaiah and move back in with your mom. I'm going back to my parents. We're not going to make it. She said, Negro, I'll live in a box with you.
That's right.
And that's when I knew she was 10 toes down. But even before that, I knew that she'd been fighting for me now almost 35 years, 32 married today, 35 almost total. So, but she was graced for this.
Yeah.
Not every woman's graced to deal with a Reggie Steele.
Absolutely not.
Because I put her through a lot. It was a lot.
But it was worth it.
Why do you say it was worth it, Kelly?
Because I just love what God's doing. I've used to tell him, if I was put on this earth to be his helpmate and that's it, so be it. I'm honored.
I don't know if God make them like that anymore, man of God. I just don't know. Maybe he does.
Like sharing in a living room. But Laterra's, I mean, millions upon millions of views. There's like 600,000 followers on YouTube. So although it can be like as simple as, you know, we were just sharing in a living room, there was a full camera crew. You guys were mic'd up. There had to be some inkling of, I think it would have been helpful to share more in the editing process, and also think about the ways that what we're actually platforming when this is a Dear Future Wifey podcast, and we're sharing the story, but we're not providing any additional context and like the mental health perspective. I think personally the issue is also like it could have had more editing. It could have had some more inclusions. And I think that's also a concern. It's not about that. It's like, oh, well, that's why you're single. And it's just another example of, as long as you're married,
No,
put up
Let
that's
me
with.
not what I'm
say,
saying.
I like to take responsibility of that because, like, from the standpoint of a platform standpoint, when I'm having these conversations, I'm not even aware of. I'll say it in the interview. I'm like, okay, people not gonna like this, but in creating a safe space for my audience, well, not my audience, but for my guests, I can do a better job to talk straight to the camera and just stop and be like, hey, listen, now this is, I do not condone this. This is their story. I said that in the episode, but I should say, if you are experiencing this in your relationship, get help, get therapy, get out of that relationship. So my takeaway when I was watching it, I said, okay, now I want to become more savvy when I'm having these conversations that are, because of course I don't even know they're sharing this level of stuff. It's coming to me at the first, you know, off the cusp, and I'm going, woof. You know,
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, this is
yeah,
getting
Right.
worse. I'm like, this is
Right.
getting worse. What in the
Right.
world? So it's taking me off
sure,
guard because I'm sitting here as a first time hearing it,
Right.
and I'm going. I said, I didn't know none of this is going on, and
right,
so and then I'm judging them to see if I'm shocked about it. If I get shocked about it and they're not shocked, then I become more reactive, and they like, well, this is cool. We passed this, and I'm going, you know, throwing a conniption. So I'm trying to judge them, and I'm going, okay, they laughing, I'm gonna laugh with them. So
sure.
it's like I mirror. It's a mirroring thing that I do from when I'm interviewing people. I'll mirror them to create a safe space. But again, the awareness that I have now is when I'm having these conversations, think of who may be on the other side of that video that's watching that video. And even though they're 30 years removed, even I had to learn that about my own testimony when I was share about my infidelity that was over 10 years ago,
Right.
that I'm saying it so casually and people like, oh, you're bragging about it. And I'm like, bragging about it? I'm not bragging. I can actually share it for the first time since I did this podcast. And people took it as, oh, you're bragging about your infidelity. And I was like, y'all don't know how suicidal I was when I was doing that. But again, other people may be in that position right then. I've been through therapy, been healed
Right.
from it, but then I'm not aware enough to say, even as free as I can say it, it can come off very insensitive. And so that's what I'm learning the more that God keeps curating these conversations because they keep getting deeper and deeper. And then, but to be aware of it enough to say, all right, who may be hearing this? Let's take a beat, let's take a moment and address the audience and say, get help if you're going through this. This is emotional abuse. This is sexual abuse. This is spiritual abuse. This is physical abuse. Go get help.
Right.
But it's not like insensitive. It's insensitive. Right. And you mentioned the aspect of mirroring, but creating a space isn't simply just mirroring what a safe space isn't simply just mirroring what the other person states. Because if it was a different scenario, and they were saying, oh well, yeah, and this, not only should she be happy that she wasn't home when she messed up my K-Swiss, she better make sure it don't ever happen again or she won't make it to another show. And he laughs it off. Do you laugh it off then as well?
Right.
A safe space isn't, but it's not, of course not, right? Because you laughed it off in that scenario. Mirroring um isn't what contributes to having a safe space. A safe space is when you acknowledge the difficult conversations, when you also hold people accountable. I think it could be more difficult when, like you mentioned, you guys are friends, but it's not like it was a live conversation. You don't watch the videos before you, because even a lot of people have shared, I've never seen an episode like this from Latarius. Like you don't do feedback for every single one. There was clearly something concerning about this one that reached out to many, many people. You don't just do it live. Like, this isn't edited. There was something that clearly was concerning about it. So we can't just use the term safe space in terms of, I'm going to make it safe for people who are harming, for the victim and the offenders. You have to think about, who is the safe space for? Like, you're talking about Dear Future Wifey podcast, and the letter every single time is Dear Future Wifey, and you're saying you want transparency and you want to have marriages. But I think it's kind of gotten to a point where it's like, do you want marriages or do you want healthy relationships? Because that's not always what you're sharing. And so it's important to not just mirror. It's one of the reasons why in my video I mentioned the fact, like, this is one of the reasons why it's really, really important to have mental health professionals in the church and have people have psychological first aid, and churches are very much doing that. I think a lot of people have made comments about, like, am I a believer? I sure am. And I also spoke at the Mount Zion Baptist Church marriage and family conference a couple of weeks ago. But there's importance to realize that, like, God works through people as well, and I can be a believer and also realize that that's not faith and dehumanizing don't go hand in hand. So I think
So we understand that keyword is how, and when people come in the comments and they are upset, I imagine they have the blueprint for how to do it effectively, how it works, what are those good stories. And I imagine because we are so inspired, like I was triggered, I was also inspired by the content. What do I want to do with it? I just want to talk about it more so that we get comfortable with the conversation. That's what this Dear Creator experience is all about. Having these conversations, slowing down, thinking about it. Learning how to sit with stories that don't look clean or resolved and still stay present. That's part of maturing. In the clip, we heard from a psychologist who brought in another lens, not just critique, but tools. She modeled what it looks like to respond with care while still offering solutions. Her presence reminds us that while we can't protect or filter everything people see online, we can practice how to process it. Not everything we hear needs to be accepted. Not everything needs to be rejected either. Some things just need to be examined. This is about becoming better investigators of content we consume, learning how to notice what's being planted in us, and choosing what we want to water. If we want to love well, we can ask questions and add that to our soul. Are we contributing clarity or just recycling pain? We can create better stories. But at the same time, what do I want to carry from it? Is examples, showing my children, writing content and stories for families of young children to really have healthy conversations. That's what I want to do with it. What do you want to do with these experiences that trigger you? Beyond the Kelly Steele story, all the other content that we consume and we react to and respond to, what is the ultimate answer that we want from it? I imagine that circle where the pastor gives opportunity for the congregation to have their questions is helpful. We have those Wednesday night Bible studies in some churches, but really don't make it so that people are left in confusion. And what's so interesting about this is I had an experience where I went to church, and it was actually today, y'all. And near the end of the service, the pastor does like a FAQ about his sermon on baptism, where he identifies questions that people would have and he answered them. And I say, this is a really good start, but like, how did they get my algorithm and know that this is what I was talking about? Right? But anyway, y'all, there's a lot that I want to pull from this experience. I hope that you can find ways to inspire you to consider some of these prompts for your own life and experience on the internet. And the last little note that I would share is check out the last 15 minutes or 15 minutes of fame. It's a documentary that I recently saw that just matched perfectly with everything I was saying about the Kelly Steele experience, because I was more triggered by the comments. But I think it's because there's always nuances to a case. And there's room for us to be upset and mad and to shame cases, but sometimes it's just too much. And perhaps there's some way that we can learn to love well. Until next time, hold on to you as much as you can. Hold on to your health, your well-being, and your mind. Be mindful. Bye. Breathe.